Hello, Emmanuel. Thank you for coming here to speak to me today about the report that you've just written, Safeguarding Our Energy Future.
Thank you, man, for having me here. It's exciting to be here to be talking about this report. We did a lot of work around the report, so let's talk about it.
Before we get to talking about the report in a bit more detail, because I think that is really interesting for us to unpack, tell me first off why we produce this report in the first place. We see, I think, in discussions with policymakers in the media, more and more of a focus on questions of resilience, of adaptation. We also see questions being raised around energy transition in the face of events such as the blackout in Spain that happened earlier this year. So, I mean, are these the sort of drivers that got you thinking about putting pen to paper and starting to bring out some of the analysis we do internally, or are there other things that are driving you?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I think those are the things really. So, if you look at the blackout in Spain and the chaos that followed that, when you look at renewables today, what is clear is that they are more vulnerable to climate events, right? So extreme weather events.
So if generating capacity is more vulnerable than traditional energy generation?
Yes, that's what we find. So if I may start by saying, first of all, that we know that all energy infrastructure is vulnerable to climate events, right? But actually, when you do look at coal or oil, gas, and compare that to the vulnerability of, say, solar PV, of onshore wind, of hydro, to these extreme weather events, it's very clear then that the renewable energy are more vulnerable.
Okay, so you have a set of hazards in terms of extreme weather events that are presumably increasing as climate change plays a way through. And all else being equal, that's posing a bigger risk for renewable generating assets than the traditional fossil fuel-based energy generation.
Absolutely. By their nature, obviously, they're more in touch with the environment. So as you have those extreme weather events, say strong winds, for example, or flooding, or drought, or heat waves, all those have got a material impact on renewables.
So does this mean we should be pausing our transition to zero carbon energy? I mean, is this a risk that should make us pause when we think about energy transition overall?
No, not really. I think this is a risk that we need to understand, right? We need to understand and mitigate against, right? So I think what we're looking at, if we don't take action now, right, the risk will keep increasing, and then we could be caught in a situation where now we've got renewables on stream, they're more vulnerable, they get impacted, and we have situations that we had, for example, in Spain, where we blackout, right?
So this is about avoiding nasty surprises down the line, and we can identify at this point what these risks look like and how they're going to evolve. Is that right?
Yes, I think that's what we've done. So the report that we've just done that you referred to earlier, what we did is we looked at 25,000 sites, right, of existing assets and planned assets, generating assets and storage assets.
So whereabouts were these?
So these were, we picked on 5 European countries.
Okay.
So the UK, Germany, Spain, Italy, and France, right? So we mapped the data. We used our own proprietary tool called Climate Spotlight. So this basically models, we can use the IPCC aligned models to see what the impact of extreme weather events would be on those renewable energy generating.
Over what sort of time frame are you looking at here? So we're looking at the IPCC, so this is the International Panel for Climate Change, and they're the sort of benchmark for different scenarios on how global warming may play out over the next, 80 years, but what time frame do you look at?
So we were looking at, okay, what time frame would most people be interested? We're looking at potentially, investors, developers, owners. What are they looking at? And what's the lifetime of most renewable assets? So we decided to go for 25 years. So we looked at the 2030 time frame, and also we looked at 2050 time frame to see how climate events then evolve over that. So we can look at the near term in 5 years' time, and also in 25 years' time, just to give us a feel of where we would be.
So you've mapped the assets, you've got this proprietary modelling that allows you to look at how different climate hazards are going to evolve through this time period to 2050. Was that it in terms of the analysis, or was there more magic that you had to work before you could draw some insights for the report?
So once we did that, one of the key things is to understand the risk, right? So we did that, and then we had to categorize all the assets into 5 buckets, if you like, 1 to 5. 1 being the lowest risk and 5 being the higher risk, right? So for an asset in what we call category 5 bucket, right? That's an asset that has about a 50% chance between now and 2030 of having an extreme weather event, right?
So that's a 1 in 2 chance between now and 2030. This is high.
This is very high for us as an insurer. As you know, this is material risk, right? You are now going at the borderline of where are you going to get insurance or not, right? And when you consider the impact as well, when you look at the severity of it, so we're looking at an asset that would have an outage for about 2 weeks, right? And potentially reduction output of about 50% for more than 6 months. Right?
So very material.
Very material.
Action, yeah.
And when you look at the asset value, right, the damage to asset value, we think the damage is up to 70% of the asset value. So quite significant.
Okay, so when we're looking at that category 5, that top category of risk that you assessed these assets against, we're talking about something that really is on the cusp of insurability here. These are big losses, quite likely to happen, and this would put this asset out of action for a material length of time.
And actually it gets worse when you consider now what happens between 2030 and 2050. That probability that I just said 50%, that goes up to 95% for assets in category 5. Wow. So that's near, we are saying it will happen.
Guaranteed, yeah. And that looks like a really bad risk from an insurance perspective. So tell me, you did this analysis across these 25,000 different sites. I mean, what are we looking at in terms of the numbers of assets that fall into the higher risk categories here?
Yeah, so when we look at the share of the assets, it's 47% of the assets of the existing assets fall into category 4 and 5.
So that's assets that are in place today. By 2030, nearly half of them are going to be in the top 2 categories of risk.
Absolutely.
So that's a pretty grim story. I mean, you're telling me there's a lot of risk out there already.
There's a lot of risk, and it gets worse when you actually analyze where we are today in terms of energy mix across those 5 countries that we've just talked about. Renewables make up today 49% of the mix. Fast track to 2030, that moves up to 67%.
Yeah.
So you can see now that the move to clean energy is underpinned really by those renewables, but they are the ones that are actually more vulnerable to the effects of physical climate risks.
But we also know that without that shift to those renewables, the effects of climate change are just going to be compounded. So
Absolutely.
It's a sort of, there is no do nothing option.
No.
We have to transition.
We have to transition. We have to, and that's what our call for action really is not to transition, but act on mitigation now.
Okay, so that sounds like a solution that we have to hand. Tell me, what does that look like in practice? When you say let's mitigate these risks now, what are we talking about? Is this requiring new technology, big spend? What are we talking about in practice?
So really, if you look at the hazards that we mentioned before, flooding, drought, extreme heat, etc., there is no known hazard to these renewables where we don't know the mitigation or the adaptation for it. So we know the solutions. What we do need is to have the ability then to have the willpower, to have the know-how to implement it. And that's where we come in, where we work with companies that we can support them to identify, prioritize the right mitigation that have the right impact on the risk.
And is this something that you're doing already with customers of Zurich Resilience Solutions?
Absolutely. This is a key element. This is where we add value. So where we start, we always say we start from an assessment of risk.
Yeah.
Right? So very early stage is to understand what is the hazard at a particular location applied to a particular asset type. right? So you talked about what you mean.
I've got a solar farm.
Yeah.
I come to you, Emmanuel, I say, look, I want to get an assessment of the risks here.
Yeah.
Talk me through how that works.
So if you have a solar farm, existing solar farm or a planned solar farm?
I'm going to build one.
Okay.
I've got a bit of cash through.
Yeah.
We're going to build a solar farm.
So first of all, I'll say, okay, where do you want to put it? That's the first thing. So with our climate spotlight data that we have, I talked about our climate modeling tool, we can then map your asset. We can see on its location what hazards are applicable to your assets. Okay, what hazards are actually material to your assets. That's the first step, right? Once we understand that, there's a list of potential mitigation measures that we can implement. The trick is identifying the right mitigation for the hazards that apply for your site.
So you're able to, first off, sort of quantify the risk, if you like, of me suffering a loss, but you're also able to help me identify the smartest way of mitigating that, the most efficient way of doing that.
That's the value add that we bring to the table, right? I was talking to somebody the other day. They had a solar farm that had suffered significant damage last year during Storm Dara. Yeah. And when you look at that, I was looking at that and say, okay, if we had been involved at the planning stage, say, of that thing, we would have first looked at the location. Was the location the right location? That's the first thing, right? Sometimes you are limited on location. You have gotten in that location to develop your farming. Okay, so then we say, okay, what are the hazards that apply, right? So simple things like making sure that your racking system is firmly attached to the foundation. That helps so that when you have the high storms, the high winds, that your panels are still fixed in place, right? When you look at another customer of ours who was talking about hail damage, right? It's what has happened with solar PV prices going down. Also, sometimes the strength of the panels themselves have not been going up with it, right? So it's getting thicker, perhaps panels, tempered panels that can withstand hail damage, right?
Which all makes sense, but also sounds to me like there's a higher upfront cost. And I mean, do you find that when you do these assessments, this analysis, that cost ends up being significant enough that projects become unviable, or are we not talking that sort of quantum?
No, we're not talking that sort of. So if we always say, if you look at our report, we have something there where we say if you are proactively implementing mitigation, it probably adds somewhere between 2 to 5% of your capex budget, right? Yep. 2 to 5%. But in terms of risk profile and potential losses, by spending that 2 to 5% extra of your capex budget, spending it wisely, getting in with experts like ourselves that help you to identify and select the right mitigation, you can reduce your potential losses by up to half.
Wow. Okay, so that's a big return on an investment up front.
Absolutely, and we can quantify that, so we can show you very early on what the mitigation measure will be, how much it's going to cost you, but also the benefit it will deliver for you and your investors.
And presumably, I mean, that's very useful to the asset owner. As you say, it'll be of interest to investors who want to understand the life span of that asset and the returns they can expect. Is it also useful from an insurer perspective? I mean, does this have a positive impact on insurability?
Yes. So if you have an asset that is not resilient, right, there'll be very few insurers that will come to the table, right? So I'm not in the insurance part of the business, but I do provide insights to my colleagues that underwrite this kind of risk. And what I can tell you is that if I've got a site that is clearly built in a resilient fashion, that I know that come with high winds, come floods, come droughts, these kind of hazards, that it will stand those and actually thrive in those conditions. That's the insight I'll provide to my underwriter. And no doubt then, that unlocks then the insurance for that kind of site.
So in a way, we could say the sort of services you provide to your clients, you're almost sort of shortcutting that loop. Rather than having a difficult conversation around insurability, you're getting ahead of that by already addressing the sorts of risks that an insurer would be looking at and feeding into their assessment of insurability in the first place.
Absolutely. It stops the insurer from dealing with a black box.
Yeah.
Right? So I open that up.
Yeah.
I see what risk exists, right? I look at sometimes it's about working with the developer, working with the investor, working with the owner to actually make sure you implement those mitigations, those adaptation measures upfront.
Yeah.
Right. And when they're going to seek for insurability, they've got the concept already wrapped in that those kind of mitigations are backed in the project plan.
So this sounds like we have very clear path to addressing some of the challenges which might be gumming up the rollout of renewables at this point in time. I mean, we started this conversation with a bleak view of how risky or how exposed to risk some of these assets are across Europe. But actually, as we discuss further, I mean, it seems to me there are very simple solutions here, and that it is a game of making sure people are aware of the ability to map these risks and quantify the benefits of resilience, and doing that as early as possible in the process.
Absolutely. And one thing I must say, because I had some comments, so you're not helping in terms of getting more renewables on stream by saying they are more vulnerable. But I say it's actually the opposite. What we're saying is we want to raise awareness, first of all. So you look at our report, we've got a big figure there. We say if we don't do anything now, we potentially stand to see 270 billion euros of losses between now and 2050.
270 billion?
270 billion.
Across those five?
Across those 5 countries.
Okay.
Right? But that's when you have a do-nothing approach.
Yeah.
And that's what we're advocating for. We want to initiate really urgent action. We want to be implementing those mitigations, those adaptation measures now. So if you're in the planning phase, if you're in the planning phase, come talk to us. We'll support you in making sure that you can identify the right mitigations, the right adaptation that you can implement for your site, make your renewables future-proof.
So it's a clear message. It sounds to me like a very sensible approach to dealing with what otherwise is an unnecessary cost that could blow the energy transition a bit off course in Europe. So that's extremely interesting, Emmanuel. Thank you very much for talking me through the nuts and bolts of the report. It's available on our website, so people can download it there. And I look forward to the next one. You've done energy. Where do we go next? What's the next report?
Watch the space, but we are exploring other areas. I mean, one of the things we've done so far is just the European countries.
Yep.
But perhaps we need to go global. We need to look at other areas. So we're thinking Canada, maybe Latin America, the US, maybe even some of the emerging economies in Africa and the Far East. So there's a lot there, even just within the energy sector, but also other sectors as well. Real estate, for example, is a sector that we may want to do a similar study.
So thank you, Emmanuel. That has been super insightful, really interesting for me. Hopefully everybody else who listens to this watches this as well. So it's been a pleasure.
I'm glad you found it interesting. Pleasure is mine.